The courage to take up arms against the British during the American Revolution wasn't an immediate cause of the coming break with Britain. I mean, most colonists lacked the military experience and had to find a way to summon the courage necessary to face these coming battles. In one chapter from James Byrd's The Bible and the American Revolution, he argues that it was the duty of preachers to summon this martial courage among the colonists. This was done through sermons, but preaching about fighting to protect their rights as Englishmen wasn't really enough. I mean, the fear of war and potentially dying in battle could easily dissuade men from enlisting, obviously. The alternative then was to instill a fear of being labeled a coward by their fellow colonists. I mean, if men wouldn't fight for their liberties, both religious and civil, then they didn't deserve them because they hadn't earned them. Obviously, there was a spiritual aspect to these patriotic sermons. Ministers linked the courage needed in the struggle of one's faith with the courage needed in the struggle to preserve their freedoms. Sermons inspired patriotism because biblical preaching shaped virtue, and patriotism couldn't exist without virtue. In their minds, a good patriot equaled a good Christian, and this was a way of thinking that a lot of colonists held to at that time. Byrd uses the example of Abigail Adams when she says, "He who neglects his duty to his Maker may well be expected to be deficient and insincere in his duty towards the public." Another example that Byrd uses is Congregationalist minister Judah Champion. He preached that virtue was a necessary part of being a patriot and a Christian, and that struggle was an inevitable part of that virtue. Maintaining freedoms wasn't supposed to be easy. In his sermons, he used a lot of examples of previous conflicts or hardships that the colonists, or the people before them, had used to get his point across. One of these examples was the settling of the new and inhospitable lands in America. It had been difficult, but the courageous settlers had prevailed, and in so doing, they had earned the right to keep their freedoms. Now, Byrd doesn't just explain what these sermons were trying to accomplish. He also points out why they were so powerful and able to inspire the courage necessary to take up arms against the British. During this period, preachers were usually more educated than most and very well respected. Their sermons were, in the author's words, the most important tool for disseminating biblical interpretation. Sermons were even more important during times when communal values, social identity, and unity were critical, like the American Revolution. This time period was also when the intensity of sermons increased. According to historian Harry S. Stout, more sermons were preached in 1776 than in any previous year. In just one example, 2,000 sermons per week were preached by Congregationalist ministers. Now, only printed pamphlets rivaled sermons in their influence of inspiring courage from the men, and even those really couldn't compare to the impact of a preacher's words, verbal or printed. This was because pamphlets tended to be geared more towards the elites, whereas sermons were directed towards all, both printed and verbal. Byrd says that only Thomas Paine's common sense matched the impact of a patriotic sermon, but he also argues that this is because common sense was more of a sermon than a pamphlet, just because of Paine's use of biblical examples and his wording throughout the pamphlet. Now, although Byrd focuses on New England in this chapter, he points out at the end that this inspiring idea of earning the rights to civil and religious liberty through war and hardship may have begun in New England sermons, but it eventually spread to other colonies as well.